Greetings and welcome to another edition of Montpelier Connection. I'm Mike Mrowicki, the State Representative for the Windham-4 District of Putney, Dummerston, and Westminster. We're here at BCTV, and I want to first of all thank all the people at BCTV for making this possible again, for all their good work here in the community. We have a special guest today, Curtis Reed of the Vermont Partnership. Curtis has been working in the community for quite a while now and has some exciting things to share. And perhaps you could just start with a little bit about the Vermont Partnership and its evolution from Alana and to where we are today.
Well, we've been a Vermont registered nonprofit since 1996. And from 1996 till about 2001, our activities really concentrated on the Brattleboro area. But after some conversation, discussion amongst the board members, realized that we could continue focusing just on Brattleboro and tending to the needs of a growing ethnic racial minority community without changing the systems that really impact the quality of life for all of us. So in 2001, 2002, we became a statewide organization, and we broadened our scope, and we broadened our activities to also include policy, to include training at an aggregate level in terms of not just within individuals, but sort of institutional level. And then in 2008, actually, we had a radical change in our strategy because of the local incident here with a high school group that called themselves the Nigger Hanging Redneck Association, and realized that we could no longer sort of go it alone, that we really needed to engage and partner with other organizations, institutions, and government to really enact the changes that we felt were going to be really appropriate for the changing cultural landscape. So then in 2009, we changed our name from Alana Community Organization to Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity. It says what we do, how we do it, and where we do it in a way that's much more impactful than the African, Latino, Asian, Native American Community Organization, which is also a mouthful.
One of the things that I've been impressed about is that your steadfastness in trying to move forward, and I feel like we're starting to bend the curve. As you noted, sometimes it's an incident that none of us are proud of that can help move things along.
Exactly.
But what I appreciate most of all, I've heard you speak several times about the changing landscape of Vermont, the changing landscape of our nation. In the last presidential election, Barack Obama recognized the demographic had changed, let's say, from when George Bush was elected. He won the election because he recognized that, while Mitt Romney was still running on a template that was outdated.
Right.
The reality is we may be doing the same thing here in Vermont. And I believe it behooves all of us, for lots of reasons, from cultural matters of social justice, economic benefits that we would all benefit from, to help this work move forward.
Sure.
A couple of events coming up that you've been organizing. The second annual Vermont Vision for Multicultural Future Conference. There's a mouthful there too.
that it is.
Tell us what happened at the first one and why a second one then?
Sure. Well, this is the conference is just 2 days out of a year-long initiative, and we've had the Vermont Vision for a Multicultural Future initiative going on for several years now, where we have sort of bilateral relationships with people around the state, whether it's state police or Department of Tourism or the Lake Champlain Regional Chamber of Commerce, or any one of the Rutland organizations that we work with, whether it's the police, the sheriff's departments, et cetera. And we wanted an opportunity to pull together sort of a strategy sharing conference where people can really talk about the kinds of incremental steps they've taken over the last year to recognize the changing demographics and where they've seized opportunities to either change their programs or to enter into a new market that they hadn't previously. a scant 30 years from now, the United States becomes a majority-minority nation. And although Vermont is moving at a much slower pace, we do need to recognize that here in Vermont, that 59% of the population growth from 2000 to 2010 were ethnic and racial minorities. There were 14 counties that had negative population growth amongst whites, and that difference and the surplus was made up with either folks who were born here or who migrated here from other parts of the country and from around the world.
What about Windham County?
Windham County was one of the counties that had negative population growth amongst whites. And
in other areas?
In other areas, there were only 4 counties that were sort of positive growth. Yeah. But our challenge when we looked at as we designed the initiative was really about how do we sustain Vermont economically over time. And our work is, albeit incremental from day to day, we're looking at changes over a span of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Our rationalization is that if we start now, then we'll get to where we want to be. But we have to suppress that cultural urge of instant gratification for something to get done. So, we've been working, so this initiative involves not only education, but law enforcement, health and human services, government, both local and state, tourism, agriculture, the whole, sort of all the key sectors that hold promise for growing our economic pie. And we feel that if the Vermont brand is a recognizable brand in the multicultural marketplace, which currently it isn't, we're beginning to get there, then we have a much greater opportunity to attract people with dollars to spend here in Vermont and hopefully have a satisfactory experience that they want to return. Cultural tourism is the fastest segment of the tourism market right now. And we helped the Vermont Department of Tourism create the African American Heritage Tour. And it's a listing of 19 sites and markers that really speak to Vermont's role in racial justice, the important roles that ethnic racial minorities have played in Vermont history, whether it's the first African American who graduated from a U.S. college is from Vermont, the first elected state legislature who was black is from Vermont. There would be no land-grant colleges or historically black colleges and universities if it had not been for Vermont Senator making the proposition to Congress in the 1890s. This is Justin Morrill? This is Justin Morrill, exactly. At Hildene, we have, there's an exhibit there on the black labor movement. And although Robert Todd Lincoln was initially on the wrong side of that conversation, he did eventually concede, and the creation of the first black labor union happened on his watch. As well as we have at Rokeby, the only well-documented Underground Railroad site that's on the National Register of Historic Places. So the trail has a lot to offer, but it also, more importantly, it's the honey that we believe is going to attract a different tourist base, and that base is really looking at how do we teach our children something. We want to take our family someplace where they're going to learn something new. Windham County has Grafton, where the Turner family, Daisy Turner, who's an iconic figure in Vermont, is located, as well as the Vermont Folk Life Center, where they have her videos and audio tapes of her stories. So we believe that with an aggressive marketing campaign, we will attract more tourists. More tourists bring dollars. Those dollars go to restaurants, boutiques, ski lift tickets, you know, the whole 9 yards. And so, but that's one part of the initiative. We also need to recognize that we don't want to have a workforce of knuckleheads in the face of a changing demographic of tourists. We don't want knuckleheads anyway, but what we don't want to have particularly are, as we're trying to attract and retain this new market, making sure that our schools are producing a workforce that is culturally competent and can attract, retain our place in that new marketplace.
What does that look like for our schools? How can our schools participate in that with intention? Does it mean ongoing, more ongoing? Because I know that the schools are trying to do some things.
They're trying to do some things. And I really have to draw back to Windham County and the work that Windham Southeast Supervisory Union is doing around you know, being very intentional in introducing students to a much more culturally diverse content. You know, the concepts are the same, but the content is really much more diverse. For example, a teacher, instead of you know, referring to the explorers as simply the bald, rather robust white guys from Europe, or making assignments to students to discover who those explorers were in China that discovered Eastern, or that, quote unquote, traveled to Eastern Africa, or Africans, West Africans who made their way to Brazil and to Central America, to those in Oceania that went and found Australia and other places. So that it's a different mindset, different sort of pedagogy that allows students to understand at a very early age, oh, I am not the center of the universe. You know, my town or my city is not the beginning and end of all things. And we want that reflected, the much more expansive view reflected in our workforce as we have more Latinos, more Black or African Americans or Asians coming to the state to really benefit and to enjoy the landscape, to enjoy the cultural and recreational opportunities that Vermont affords everyone. With special appeal right now, this is one of several phases of the project. One, identifying the sites, publishing a brochure, making sure we have a robust web presence. But the second phase of this is really around curriculum development and making sure that the sites are accessible to schools. You know, that a teacher doesn't have to worry about, gee, you know, so we're going to go to Hildene, or we're going to go to the Alexander Twilight Home up in Brownington. What is there to do beyond simply visiting and seeing and touching what they have there? But you know, what are the transformative values that these particular sites represent? And so we have a special appeal out right now that people can go to our website.
That website is?
VermontPartnership.org, VermontPartnership.org.
One word there?
One word, Vermont is spelled out. And just click on the donate page. There's but we really need to make sure that every school child in Vermont has an opportunity to learn about the role that people of African descent have played in the state.
There's an arm of education right now that I'm aware of called place-based learning. Children understanding where they are, who's around them, and what are all the threads that make this a web of community. This sounds like a great opportunity too to include that in place-based learning.
It is, and you know, these are 19 great places to start with. We culled through about 100 sites around the state to make the selection for this group right here, and this will certainly expand over time as other sites have, you know, interpretive services, or you know, have handicap accessibility, any number of things that would. But this is the base. It will grow.
And is Windham County the gateway to this?
Windham County is the gateway.
Yeah.
You know, as Windham County does, so does the rest of the state.
There we go.
So, as I said, you know, this trail is part of the Vermont Vision for a Multicultural Future. We do a lot of work with law enforcement. We've probably trained 200-odd law enforcement officers, from state police to sheriff's departments to local police departments, on bias-free policing and how implicit bias influences their decision making.
Yep.
And you know, one of the things which we need to recognize is that for most tourists, the only public official that they will come in contact with will be someone in law enforcement, either because they may have been driving a little bit too quickly, but more so because of, you know, of accidents and you know, getting lost or being the victim of a crime or witness to a crime. That oftentimes that only contact that a tourist might have is largely to be someone in law enforcement. So we've been working consistently over the last 5 years now, with state police. I mean, we train each of the new classes coming in, classes of troopers, in their post-basic training on bias-free policing, understanding it, and understanding the kind of the social context of one's own personal growth and how that butts up into an understanding the other, whether the other is a person with disabilities or gay or lesbian or transgendered or of another religion. It really doesn't matter who the other is, but there's a common set of principles that we've been teaching that allows law enforcement to be much more expansive in the way that they're focusing on public safety as opposed to enforcement.
I think we all benefit from that too. And I know in trainings I did in educational settings, it was helpful for me to learn, for instance, there are cultures where children are not supposed to look in the eyes of adults.
Correct.
And it's thought of as a great disrespect. Whereas in our culture,
right,
look at me.
Exactly.
Doesn't always work that way, and it's helpful if we know that this is not a child who's trying to deny something,
Exactly.
or an adult. So small things like that, I think we all do well
Right.
to learn about. Now, one of the things I became aware of in the last legislative session was that there was a study that put some information out there a lot of us were uncomfortable about around racial profiling. There are a number of us who would like to do something about that. Representative Susie Wizawati, who sits next to me on the House floor and sits on the Judiciary Committee, has been very clear about this is something we need to address as part of a bigger picture too, because she's very interested in a greater sense of social justice in our corrections. Well aware of the high percent of minority in our correction system. Can you tell us a little bit about the work, though, you've been doing statewide and helping that effort?
Well, if you're speaking to the ACLU study, that, you know, we had difficulties with the study itself, which we expressed to law enforcement. You know, that there's undeniably disproportionate contact between law enforcement and individuals of color in the state. Our issue with the particular ACLU report was that it was comparing apples to something else, that census data versus arrest data. For some communities, just imagine you have about 100 residents, and 2 of those residents are residents of color. And then you pull up your arrest records, and you have 100 arrests. And out of those arrests, 16 out of the 100 are individuals of color. Now let's assume for the moment that the 2 Vermont residents of color are law-abiding citizens. So the 16 that are there have addresses outside of the state: New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey. And we felt that the report really cast a damaging shadow on law-abiding ethnic racial minority Vermonters. That doesn't dismiss the reality that there are other things that are operating when we look at what the numbers are. We think there's a great opportunity to discuss the supply side of the question. But the work that we do with state police is, how do we take those numbers and fold that into the training cycle? And so, the trainings that we did, 4 years ago are somewhat different than the ones that we do currently today, because we have not only data around traffic stops, the ACLU report. When I was chair of the Vermont Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, we did an extensive briefing on racial profiling in the state. And where Vermont distinguishes itself, we believe, from other states, is that there is a genuine effort on the part of leadership in law enforcement, particularly at state police and in some of the counties, to really address this and to, how do we understand our biases? How do we understand the execution of our duties in a way that is clearly transparent? And so, those are the kinds of difficult questions that we're working with, exposing the new recruits to. We've trained kind of the upper command structure, state police. And just this fall, we've begun a series of trainings, a cycle of trainings for troopers that have been on the ground between 5 and 15 years. So it's really a question of intention, and there's a notable difference when you have leadership at the top that is taking on the challenge of a cultural shift within their own organizations. Yeah. And that's really what this conference is about, the Vermont Vision for a Multicultural Future. It'll be at Mount Snow on the 7th and 8th of November, but it's really getting people together who have been firebranded in some way and trying to make the cultural shift happen within their own organizations, for them to share their strategies with others. We had a great testimonial from Keith Clark, who is not only the sheriff for Windham County, but he's also the president of the Vermont Sheriff's Association, who said that essentially what the conference opened up for him was that there were folks in other sectors, whether it was tourism or education or health and human services, that were doing things that created in him a mindset that, I might be able to try some of those things. Yeah.
Keith has been doing a lot of good work, and I can't say how much I admire what he's been doing, and I'm glad it's being seen around the state now. He's worked with us a lot in Montpelier on the Human Services Committee on mental health issues, and I think he's somebody who realizes public safety people, police officers, are often the first line of entry into the human services, and he felt about it enough to go out and get a degree in social work.
Right.
So he's done a lot to change the culture, and I think he's admired around the state for helping people understand we could do this a lot easier.
Yes.
If we understand the mental health connection between people and so-called criminal behavior.
And in terms of bias-free policing, Keith trained or had training for Windham County deputies 2 years before any other sheriff's department in the state. Which is why we like to say that, as Windham County goes, so does the rest of the state.
Well, Keith and I have talked about this a little bit, and some of what he takes from his military training, and he says one of the good things the military has done is they really have been at the advance of integrating our society in a lot of ways. There's a lot of innovations that have come out, whether it's in education, culture, where people have been forced to get together and work together. And I think he's an example of somebody who's been open-minded to what works for everybody, and so I admire what he's doing. We've got about 3 minutes left.
Great. Well,
in regards to this conference, who do you think should be there?
Well, the conference is designed for cabinet level, executive level, and legislators that are visionary, that have maybe tried something or they want to try something, as well as we're going to have a healthy mix of folks who are experienced at managing change. And that's really a large part of what we're doing here. It's a very organic process. We'd like to thank the financial sponsors of the conference. We've got if I have a moment, I can sort of rattle them off.
Yeah.
The Windham Foundation,
Yeah.
World Learning, the Trust Company of Vermont, the Thompson House, Mount Snow, Champlain College, Middlebury College, College of St. Joseph's in Rutland, Tetra Tech ARD, then back locally the Richards Group, Brattleboro Savings and Loan, Brattleboro Memorial Hospital, the Retreat, and the Ford Subaru dealership. And together they've provided the kind of the financial underpinnings for the conference to take place, and as well as our continuing work. They said, the conference is just 2 days out of a year-long initiative, and we strongly encourage your viewers and those who are attending the conference to.
Sure. So how would people sign up for this?
Sign up. They go to our website, VermontPartnership.org, and on the right-hand side of the screen, there's you can click on the second annual Vermont Vision for Multicultural Future Conference. And that'll take you straight to the registration page.
And it's happening at Mount Snow?
It's happening at Mount Snow on the 7th and 8th of November. We'll be there for 2 days, actually a day and a half, but it'll be a productive time for all. Based on comments from last year, we piloted this last year. Our facilitator is Adrian Seeger from Conferences at Work, and we are really geared up for another really exciting and productive and in some cases life-changing experience for many.
Well, we're about out of time. We were talking earlier and I said a half hour is going to go fast.
Well, it has.
I hope you got half of what you wanted to say out, and if not, maybe we can get together again and share some more with the people out there. But thank you for your work.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Helping move things forward in Vermont.
Great. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in again for another edition of Montpelier Connection, sharing what's going on in our community. And thanks again to the people at BCTV. Until next time, I'm Mike Mrowicki. Bye-bye now.